Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingstein. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for our podcast this week. My name is Mark Klingstein with SEMA Partners. Each week, we interview leaders and they share lessons learned from their careers. Our goal is to help you become a better leader. This week, we're happy to have join us for our conversation, Sue Ashford. Sue is a professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. She is seen as an expert in the area of leadership development, leader effectiveness. She has written numerous articles for publications such as Harvard Business Review, New York Magazine, and she's written a new book entitled The Power of Flexing: How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth. Looking forward to today's conversation with Sue. And it's great to have Sue join us for our conversation. Thanks, Sue.
Happy to be here.
Great. Well, I guess first off, can you give us just a little bit of your history, a little bit of your career story?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I've been a faculty member in management, organizational behavior groups for my whole career, and really came to the study of leadership about 20 years ago. And it started when I became a leader in our school. I was the school's senior associate dean. And suddenly leadership ideas, how you did it, how you thought about it, how you grew as a leader became really important to me. And I've been studying them ever since. I just recently wrote a book pulling together all of that. And I'm real excited to share it.
One of the questions I love to ask guests and our audience are new and up and coming leaders. And if you were able to go back, knowing what you know now, and talk to a 22-year-old Sue, what advice would you give her?
The advice I'd give her is to loosen up. Don't be so, tightly clenched about succeeding. There are a lot of different ways to succeed in the world. And people tend to find the way that works best for them. And so to have a little faith that that's going to happen. There are two aphorisms that I really love. One is move towards the light. So when something is really attractive to you, you're really feeling it, try to move towards that. And then the other one, this one my kids hate because I tell them it all the time, and that is, it's easier to steer a car that's moving than one that's standing still, which we've all can physically experience with a car. But in our lives, the idea is that just get started on something and then steer the boat or the car as you're going. But really keeping some movement going is important.
Now, you wrote a new book that came out in October 2021, and the title of the book, The Power of Flexing, and I love the subtitle, How to Use Small Daily Experiments to Create Big Life-Changing Growth. Talk a little bit about that. I know you've been teaching leadership for years, and it sounds like you've kind of taken some of those insights that you've learned, and talk a little bit about that. We definitely want to jump in and talk about some of the principles.
Great, happy to. So, I've been teaching. My teaching is focused on how to help people be more effective in their organizational lives throughout my whole career. Once I discovered leadership, it became kind of dual focused. How do you become effective as a leader, but also how do you thereby help the whole organization be more effective? That's what I love about leadership is it's a leverage concept. If I can help people to be better leaders, it helps organizations to be better, it helps other people to grow and so forth. And so the book really pulls together all my work on leadership, but also dating back to all the work I've been teaching since I began in this career on how to be effective in organizations. It started out as a book on how to help leaders grow. In the process of working with my editor, we realized that these principles are relevant for anyone who wants to grow their personal and interpersonal effectiveness. And it makes sense because personal and interpersonal effectiveness is so intertwined with being a good leader. You can't be a good leader without it. But people who aren't interested in leadership but just want to grow, whether in an organization, out in the community, in their families, also can benefit from the book. And it's been really delightful as the book has been out to hear reports back from all sorts of people, 20-somethings trying to figure out a life, people going into retirement, trying to figure out a new life, that they've really gotten a lot out of the book, whether they're leading or not. But my first love is helping leaders to grow. And so I could say a little bit more about that if you think that would be useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we jump into that, I think one of the things that we've found is that, leaders typically, they definitely need to continue to grow, but that first leader that maybe has just been handed the reins to a team, they're focused on just trying to figure it out, and maybe they were great as an individual contributor. What advice would you give them as they're jumping into that first new leadership role?
Yeah, this is my favorite group. I run an executive program here at the Ross School focused just on this group because that is the critical transition. Some people never make it. They realize I just am an individual contributor and that's where I'm going to put my focus in my life. But for people who want to try to make more of a difference in other people's lives or want to keep moving up an organization, this transition is critical. So, part of the advice is to recognize that you know and you don't know how to do this. You know because you've observed leaders, you've seen role models of leaders, you've seen people do what you would never do. So they're a role model of what not to do. And part of the advice is that you need to kind of take action, try some things out, have a little bit of an experimenting mindset, which is integral to the power of flexing in the book. But it's this idea that you don't know yet, you don't know yet exactly how you're going to lead. You're going to have to try some things out, pay close attention, see how they go, and then, either commit to that experiment or try something else. But you really need to be in that kind of mindset. The hardest thing to do is to figure it all out and then implement. That's the trying to steer a car that's standing still. You want to get moving, but be adaptive in how you go at it.
So you're talking about growing intentionally. I talked about the growth, and I think the importance of it. Sometimes I think people get overwhelmed by the job, and then they forget about continuing to grow and develop. But talk about how somebody can do that intentionally. How do they get that mindset?
Yeah, happy to. The book starts with this insight that's not new. It's fairly old. It's based on research. They asked a bunch of people, high-achieving, highly placed leaders who are considered effective, because not everybody who's highly placed is considered effective. Sure. They asked them, how did you get where you are? What did you do? And they said, that 70% of what got them there is the experiences they had. 20% was other people, like role models or mentors, and only 10% was classes and books. So you might think it's ironic that I wrote a book, but my book is about how do you get the most out of that 70%. So if 70% of what you learn to enhance your personal and interpersonal effectiveness is from experiences, you have to be pretty good at extracting knowledge from those experiences. And that's what the book is about. So the first thing, it just asks you to recognize that that's where you're going to learn. And so in some ways, what I present is very efficient because it says you're going to be having lots of experiences. As a new leader, you have, probably that first 9 months are just chock full of new experiences that you're trying to wrestle with. That's going to be happening, whether you learn from them or not. But if you want to learn from them, you could go at them in a particular way that allows you to extract more lessons. And the book articulates 6 strategies that allow you to do that. And you could do any one of those strategies and learn, but if you were to do all 6, you would learn the most for sure. So, I can tell you what they are and maybe just talk through 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So the first is the mindset that you take into a new experience, a challenging experience, like becoming a leader for the first time. And this is based on Carol Dweck's work, differentiating a performance-proof mindset, where you go into it with a clenched jawed intention to prove how great you are. And you're on the defense against anyone who suggests that you're not. That mindset, it turns out, as you move into more complex and dynamic positions, really doesn't serve you well. You really need to have more of a learning mindset. I'm going to go at these first 9 months trying to do it the best I can, see what I can learn so that I can be a better leader in the second 9 months. And that mindset, so that's the first practice. The second is to try to isolate something you need to work on. It might be that people have pointed out that you're not a very good listener, or it might be that you have a horrible habit of multitasking when people are talking to you. You're actually also writing things and you have a phone in your ear as well. And you want to curb that, or you're not very influential and you want to get more influential. So try to isolate something that you can bring a focus into your experiences to also work on that thing. Try to learn more about you in the experiences that you're going to be having anyway. So let's say it's be more influential. So the new leader says, I'm going to work on my verbal influence strategies, being more influential in my talk, in meetings, and with other people. So that's great. Now you have a focus. So every time you're going to talk in a meeting, you're like, okay, I remember I'm going to work on that. But then you want to think through, what are some experiments I could try to do that, to make that happen? And so maybe you decide, I'm going to talk last in a meeting, not first, because I think I'll have more lasting influence. I'm going to work on my voice tone and talk in a different lower voice register so that I can have more influence. Or some other such thing. So you decide on things you can try, and then you start going in your experiences, doing these experiments. And then the fifth practice is you seek feedback. And you can do that either by paying attention. Am I having influence? Did my idea sway the day, or did it get completely ignored? Are people seeming to go along with my vision that I express for my team or not? So you can observe, or you can ask. Maybe there's a trusted coworker and you could say, look, I'm working on being more verbally persuasive. How am I doing from what you observed in that meeting? And then finally, you have to do the thing that's most difficult, especially for busy new leaders, is carve out a little time for reflection. Because you really have to synthesize what's happening. Am I getting more persuasive? Am I staying the same? Am I getting worse? Am I more persuasive to these people, not those? And then you try to extract learning from that. And people have found lots of creative ways of being more reflective, whether it's using the morning commute to do that, whether it's waiting until they're on airplane travel and doing that, whether it's talking to a friend at the end of the day about it. There are a variety of ways you can do it that aren't super onerous, and you probably could fit them into your life if you make growth a priority.
How do you set like a flexible goal? What are some of the things that you need to think about as far as, is that through feedback that you're getting? How do you set those goals as far as for growth?
Well, when people read the book, they'll get lots of ideas on that.
Sure.
We interviewed 70 some leaders and we talked to them about issues just like that. And there were a variety of ways people did it, but there are three I could isolate. One I call fantasies of the future. Future Sue is going to be organized, influential, a good listener. And by that might be because you observe someone doing that very effectively, or it just might be something you just want to build into your life more. And that's a way you could get a goal. So, there's one woman I talked to who found she was trying to do a very complex thing with her business, and she found that she kept getting stymied because she didn't know how to do the next step. And so it just kept going on her to-do list day after day. So she set the goal of making progress even if I don't know what I'm doing. And sometimes the progress was simply reading how to do it. But instead of getting stymied, she was able to move forward. So getting some specificity about that fantasy of the future you. The other way people get goals are a little bit in what you said. I call it the pain of the present. Where you can tell that you're either causing pain for others or things aren't going as well as they could. You get feedback. A lot of the people got feedback on something they needed to work on, and so they put it on their agenda. A third one I can articulate it, I call phantoms of the past. Sometimes we come to realize that things we learned really early in our lives, ways of interacting with powerful people that we learned from interacting with our parents when we weren't even aware that we were learning, we bring into our organizational lives and in ways that aren't particularly effective. And so that's kind of a self-discovery process, but realizing that, I react to all men like I reacted to my 3 older brothers. And, it's all unconscious on my part. But once I realize it, I can start to work on it. I have trouble asking for help because you weren't allowed to ask for help in the household I grew up in. Once you realize that you're carrying that lesson forward, you can start to work on it. So, many of my favorite leadership books are about that inner work. And I recommend that to anyone who becomes a new leader, to spend some time getting to know this instrument of leadership, yourself. Where are its weak spots, its triggers, what causes it anxiety that maybe doesn't cause anyone else anxiety, that kind of thing.
So as a leader, one of your responsibilities is helping others grow. And so you're working on yourself and working on some of these areas, maybe blind spots that you have in your life. I was just listening to a leader talking about that we can only see about 60% of who we are, and the other 40% is blind to us.
Sure.
But talk a little bit about, again, when you see areas in others, what do you encourage leaders to do as far as in coaching others that maybe don't even realize that they need coaching? What are some practical things that they can do to help their team grow?
Yeah, I think leaders have 2 responsibilities. One is to coach and the other is to set the context. So for coaching, there's a whole chapter in the book where it really didn't come from me. I was just a conduit for 2 amazing coaches who talked about their practice, what they do, how they set up a safe environment for people to explore their needed areas for growth, how they help direct them. One said, the question I often use is, imagine we're meeting at an airport lounge 5 years from now. What would you want to be saying has happened in your life between now and then? To help people get to sense of where they're trying to go, and then they can figure out how they need to grow to get there. So there's a variety of tactics you can use in directly coaching someone, but you also have a role of setting the context generally. If you create what some academics have called a genius culture instead of a growth culture, you're not going to get, people aren't going to grow very much. They're going to be too afraid. They're going to revert to trying to prove all the time that they're good enough. And you can set a growth culture by the questions you ask your direct reports when you meet with them. Hey, how have you grown since we last talked? What are you working on? I'm working on this. You can role model it. When you present your amazing PowerPoint, you can talk about the process of getting there and reveal that it wasn't all perfect and painless, but there was some pain. But it's worth it to engage painful things in order for you to grow, and then hopefully for them, they can see that they can grow as well. So there's a lot of things you can do in those dual responsibilities I think you have as a leader. Some leaders say, well, how can I do that? I don't own the whole culture, and that's true. But people look to their local culture first. That's what research has shown shapes people the most. So you have more influence than you think with your team and the culture you set on your team. So don't avoid using it. I mean, take charge, use it.
I've heard you talk a little bit in one of the talks you gave about the whole leadership development program, that a lot of times I think you made the comment that a lot of times leadership programs don't pick the right people to put through their leadership program, and you leave out a large portion of the organization as far as in that training. But talk a little bit about creating that learning culture kind of across an organization versus just kind of the high potentials that
Right.
you see in an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think organizations really have a choice. They've gone at leadership development one way, but there is another way. So the way they've gone at it is we identify people who are high potential, worth investing in. We send them off to programs, or when this idea about learning from experience came into popular knowledge, people said, oh, this is great. We're going to send our high potential people into those kinds of experiences that really have a lot to teach. So we're going to send them on overseas assignments. We're going to switch them to a different plant so that they can grow faster. And that is fine, but it does two things that are problematic. One is it says to the rest of the organization, so if you identify 15%, you're saying to 85%, don't lead. We don't expect you to lead. We're not looking for it from you. And, in a day and age when things are getting more complicated, more dynamic, we probably need more leadership in more places. There seems to be consensus about that, both in academia and in the world of practice. But most organizations say, yeah, but we're not very good at doing that. Well, part of it is you basically have told them, not you. And the second problem is what you mentioned. It's not an opinion of mine. It's based on research by a couple of different scholars who basically they studied who organizations picked and found out like they didn't even pick the right people. People that weren't picked emerged as leaders to far greater extent than some of the people that they did pick. The problem is that leadership in this day and age can't just come from people in positions of leadership in organizations. We need more dynamic influence going on. We need not just the principal of the school, but the science teacher down the hall who has a great idea and people listen to her and she really can get people to rally behind it. We need that in order to be responsive in what are sometimes chaotic times. So you have the ability to shift to say, we're going to presume everyone can be a leader and we're going to support their leadership growth. And it doesn't mean you take your limited development dollars and spread them over 100% of the people. It says you use those dollars differently. So you use them to work on the culture so that the culture is more one of promoting growth. Satya Nadella came into Microsoft and he said, I want us to be a growth-oriented company. So, suddenly managers are asking people about growth. They're talking about it in their meetings. They're talking about how ways in which they are growing themselves. And, you can support people's growth culturally in that example. You also can, in the 6 practices I laid out, those can be supported through organizational practices. If you take your new hires or your new leaders, let's say you have a cadre of new leaders and you have them work together over a year where they set a focus goal, they design some experiments, they try it out, they're seeking feedback, they're reflecting together. It's just a different way to use your development dollars, one that supports individuals growing themselves rather than assuming that we need to open their heads and pour in some knowledge, which will automatically turn into growth.
So what books, as you have read and that you recommend to other leaders, definitely encourage people to pick up your book, but what other books and authors have made an impact and that you recommend to others?
Yeah, well, there's so many. So I just
Sure.
isolated a few. One is a book that probably won't be on the radar of many, but it's called Ego-Free Leadership. And it's by Brandon Black and Shane Hughes. This is a great book that helps you to see your unconscious habits that are getting in the way of you being the most effective leader you could be. So I'm really big on this inner work of leadership. This is a book that will help you sort of figure out what that means and figure out some of the ways in which you need to engage in it. So I love that one. The other one is also a book that came out this year, but I recommend it and one other. Two books on power. Power for All by Julia Badalana and Tiziana Cassiaro, two Harvard professor and a Toronto professor, who basically talks about how we use power, how we need to think about it, power. Leaders need to get comfortable with power. They can't say, oh, I don't want to be a powerful leader because that's so negative. Your subordinates want you to have power, but they want you to use it effectively. I also love this book, You Have More Influence Than You Think. It's by Vanessa Bohns, B-O-H-N-S, and it's a book about the unexpected ways in which we all have influence and how you can use it, how to be more persuasive, how to amp up your power of persuasion. And I think those are things leaders need. And so I'd recommend both the inner work and then getting comfortable with power as two things that could be a focus for new leaders.
Well, you mentioned, I think, 3 books. I don't think anybody else, this is our 133rd episode, and I don't think anybody's mentioned those books. So it's always great to have some new ones to add to the list. I'll definitely pick those up. Outside of work, what do you like to do to recharge?
Well, I fight to get a good night's sleep, but I have a lot of insomnia. So therefore, I read a lot of novels. But I don't think that's recharging. My recharging mostly happens in the summer where I live. I love gardening. I love just sort of digging around, watching beautiful things emerge from the earth. We happen to have a swimming pool, so I really like hanging out there, and particularly when more of my family visits, because we happen to have a swimming pool, and so it's a lot of fun in that way.
So what parting advice would you give to a new and up and coming leader?
Yeah, my advice would be that you have a lot of on your agenda. You probably have some fears associated with leading for the first time, but also to remember that it's one of the most impactful things you can do. People need good leadership that gives them a sense of meaning about their work, good leadership that gives them clear direction, good leadership that encourages them to be the best they can be. So it's incredibly rewarding as well. There is a lot of responsibility, but incredibly rewarding. And, the more you keep growth on your agenda, as well as meeting the day-to-day responsibilities, the more it puts you in a mindset of finding that joy and having that impact. So those are the 2 things I'd recommend.
So how would somebody learn more about your work and definitely your new book?
Well, for those who are watching this visually, here is the book, The Power of Flexing. I love the ladders on the cover, which suggests that, we all can move up, get better, be a better version of ourselves. You can find out more about the book and about speaking engagements, etc., about me on susanashford.com. Pretty easy.
Well, Sue, I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk to us today. I know this is going to be helpful for our listeners, and wish you continued success in all that you're doing.
Thanks. I totally enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by SEMA Partners, helping you find your next great leader.